Good afternoon. Welcome to the fifth Open Series event this academic year. Um, the D6 Architecture Open Series 2021 is a series of public lectures organized by the Architecture Program at Heriot-Watt University, Dubai. And through the Open Series, the D6 community has the opportunity to hear from architects, designers, and academicians from the region and around the world. The presentation today is roughly going to be about 45 minutes. Which will be then followed by a Q&A session. You can place your questions in the Q&A chat during the presentation, and they would be answered at the end. I would now like to welcome our speaker today. Is a dear friend of mine, Miguel Samanez. Miguel is an architect with more than 10 years of experience, who has worked in some of the most prestigious design offices in the UK. I'm sorry for that ping that's coming at the background. And since then, he's been working on a diverse range of projects from commercial, residential, and hospitality. He graduated from the Ricardo Palma University in Peru and later obtained a master's degree in architecture and urbanism from the Architectural Association in London. He has worked with Zahadid Architects and then with Heatherwick Studio in UK as lead designer and project manager. He has been involved in landmark buildings such as Google headquarters in USA and the UK, the Singapore Airport New Terminal 5, and the Morpheus Hotel in Macau. He has also collaborated with influential firms such as Big Architects, Gensler, KPF, and BDP. I would like to thank Miguel here for taking time and sharing his work experience with the D6 community here. With no further ado, I'd like to hand over to Miguel. Thank you.
Well, hello everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, Miguel. That's good.
Okay, that's great. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me, Shamila, and thank you to the university. And I mean, it was a surprise. I was not expecting this, but it's always nice to present your work. So that's great. And of course, thank you to everyone who has attended. I mean, it's going to be a nice opportunity to showcase what I have done in the last maybe 10 years or so. So I mean, just a quick intro, maybe just to say a little bit more from what Shamil already mentioned. Yes, I'm an architect, and you can just call me Miguel. And I've been working in the UK for the last 10 years, and maybe a few more years back in my home country. So I'm originally from Peru, and I think I had the privilege to have worked with some of the most maybe prestigious architects, I believe, in the current times in the UK and maybe in the world. One of them is Zahadid Architects, and the other one Heatherwick Studio. So which both of them were actually great experiences in along my career. And to just expand a little bit on my background, as I mentioned, I'm from Peru, and if you Google Peru, the first thing that you see is actually, or the first thing that you hear about Peru is obviously Machu Picchu, llamas, and all these kind of mountainous regions that we have in the Andes, all these kind of different colors, maybe the diversity that happens over there in terms of the Amazon forest, again, the mountains, and of course the desert. Something that has been also trendy very recently, at least in the UK, in London for the last 10 years, is Peruvian food. And but of course, these are all the highlights of my country. But I'm actually from the capital, which is a little bit different from the highlights that I just mentioned. The capital, Lima, which is a very large city, one of the most populated cities in Latin America, and I believe also in the whole of America. We have around 12 to 13 million people living there. And of course, I mean, I guess it's nothing compared to cities in maybe India or China. But in itself, I mean, 12 million people is quite a lot. And as you can see, the city is very much like what you see at the moment. You see in the screen, it's a very flat city. Only very few towers. I think towers are just appearing now. And this, of course, this is just one of the sides of the city. The city is actually settled in a desert, and it's very much extended, just as I was saying, just flattish across the land. And you have all these hills around it. And what you're seeing on the screen maybe is just represents maybe just what 20-30% of the city. Actually, most of the city lives in like, unfortunately, many other Latin American cities lives within poverty. So there's high levels of poverty within the city and also within the country. So what you often see is this kind of settlements that you see over here, which is actually much more than settlements which don't really have access to, I don't know, electricity, light, water. So, and they live, of course, in very poor conditions. From maybe from an urban or architectural point of view, it's actually quite interesting to see how these settlements just self-emerged without any kind of organization behind them. You know, they just starting just building one house here and one house there, and then little by little they create this kind of system around the hills and the outskirts of the city, and they have this kind of picturesque view in terms of how each of the houses were coloring themselves in order to get to grab somehow the different identity in between the different houses that were cohabiting here. So for example, here you have all these pastel colors like purple, green, blue, and this is very much repeated again around the city. But again, I mean, as I mentioned, the conditions are very badly still, and even though these settlements have existed like this already for many years, there hasn't been really much improvement. So it is within this context that I actually studied architecture in Lima, in Peru, in the university that is called Ricardo Palma. So this is just one snapshot of the university. The university actually has a large campus, and I think back then it was maybe one of the most prestigious universities to study architecture in Latin America. They gave a huge emphasis on design more than a technical side of the business, to put it like that. So, for example, some of the things that we are coming up with were like projects like this one, for example. So it's like projects that you wouldn't usually see, especially in the first years of architecture. So they were always pushing us to be or to think a little bit out of the box and to come up with or at least to discuss different ideas in between the students and also with professors, and that's something that I appreciated very much about the university. That it was about that. It was mainly about ideas, mainly about concepts, more than anything else. And of course, I'm guessing that this is an arguable point of view, right? Because I mean, of course, it depends on the preferences of the student or the designer, right? I mean, some people may be more focused on actually detailing or construction or the construction side of it. But in my case, at least, it fitted very much with what I wanted or what I was expecting. So in this case, for example, this is just a quick snapshot of some of the projects that we were making back then. Like on the left side, this is this kind of inhabitable machine that you can actually move it and actually was performing certain actions. And on the right side is this kind of tower, a very dramatic tower that was created for that reason, because of the inhabitants that were taking over the building. But of course, that's not to say that we were not doing maybe some other more, to call it in a way, maybe more standard projects. I don't know if that's the right word, but so for example, in these ones, it was more about how we were inhabiting the city, how we could maybe co-live with the existing network. And but in any case, if I think back then at my uni times, I think it was, as I'm saying, they were quite exciting. I remember some of the projects that I actually remember the most. Excuse me. Some of the projects that I actually remember the most, it was like there was this small project where we kind of were pushed to act like if we were in the Lord of the Rings world. And we had to create this kind of machine, this kind of device that help us escape from the bad guys. I forgot the name of the bad guys, but anyway, so we had to create this device that could actually make us escape faster from the bad guys. So I remember making, and of course, I mean, this we had to do sketches, or maybe we could do renders, but back then I was not doing any renders. Everything was actually physical models. So we had to create this physical model that had to perform. In my case, I remember I created this kind of jumping device. So I actually was putting some sprints in between the structure that I was creating, and which was a little bit fragile because it was actually breaking, but it was actually fun. It was a pretty fun experience because it was not only making us think in terms of performance, but also in terms of how many people you're actually putting inside this machine, what are the materials that you have to have in order to have the people inside, and how can you manage to scale faster and so on. So with all this already in mind, then when I went to London years after, when I came to London years after, and I started to do my master. I actually did a master in architecture and urbanism in the Architecture Association in London. The ideas that we were already discussing back then were not that different to what we were already doing, to what I was already actually doing in Peru. And actually, maybe the only difference in London was that we were doing a more rigorous kind of research. I mean, we were like sort of scientists back then during the master. Actually, the name of the master was called Design Research Laboratory. So we were researching all these kind of systems, all these kind of innovative ways of seeing architecture. I think my master was very much based on self-emerging processes, parametric system, which I think I think these are terms that maybe you have heard before, or maybe you're already aware of, or you're using them even. So, but yeah, it was based on self-emergence, parametric system, was taking nature as a very direct influence to whatever we were doing. So we were trying to create different patterns or different behaviors that by the repetition of these behaviors, they were eventually creating different other patterns and then other systems. And then the systems were creating some other systems. And then finally an ecosystem that actually was living together just through the original pattern that we created at the beginning. So what I'm showing here in the screen is very much that. It's for example, these were pixelated surfaces that were reacting to the sun in our case. But in any case, they were reacting to a sort of attractor. I don't know if you can see where the mouse is pointing, but they were reacting to some sort of attractor. And every time you move the attractor from one place to the other one, the surface reacted with it, and there was more movement where the attractor was moving. So, and when we saw this, we actually thought that it was a great opportunity to create furniture, or maybe some installations, or any kind of inhabitable space to bring persons and to have it in whatever way they prefer. Similarly, also we were also creating different enclosures, and again with the use of attractors. By moving the attractor, we were actually lifting different surfaces. In this case, these surfaces were made out of this kind of square patterns that we were also rotating progressively. So that was creating a sort of skin that we also found very interesting in order to be applicable to a building. And our agenda for the master, at least the agenda of my team, was actually based on interiors. So it was called interiority. So all the systems that we were creating here had the goal of creating certain interior atmospheres, which is more or less what I'm showing here. So, and then again, this is very much based on the systems that we were creating back then. So, for example, in this image, you see the floor pattern, the floor that has certain patterns. And why the patterns are like that is because they are actually reacting to the light that is coming from the ceiling, and the light that is coming through in between the different patterns that are happening in the ceiling. And likewise with the furniture, the shape of the furniture was actually growing in that way because it was reacting to certain attractors that we were putting back then in the space. And so as you can see, we had this kind of different systems, like the floor system, like the furniture. We call it like that: the floor system, the furniture system, the ceiling, and actually the facade. That were actually they didn't started as related with each other, but by the time we were putting them together, they could actually communicate with each other in order to create this experience. This is also a similar one. This from another point of view of the building, where I think this was, if I'm not mistaken, actually it was what we were calling a restaurant. I mean, the names of these rooms were actually very much relative. This could have been a restaurant, it could be a bar. It didn't really matter that much. It mattered more the type of atmosphere we were creating and the progress between one atmosphere and the other. As I was saying, the agenda for my master was not exterior, it was actually more based on interiors. So it was actually the interiors that drove the final shape of the building. So we actually didn't model this from the beginning. So we were actually modeling the interiors, and the interiors were fitting what the shape was going to be of the outside building, and this is how it came up in the end. And this is the team. This is actually my team during the master. We may look a little bit happy here. I don't know. I don't remember. What I do remember was that it was really exhausting times, very fun times, but also exhausting, very late nights or nights that there was actually no sleep at all. And so I don't know how tired we must have been during this presentation, but it's something I usually like to highlight, the teamwork, which is because I see many presentations that many people actually focus more on the research or more on the outcomes or the different studies, but not too much on the team. And I think actually the team, at least in my case, the team was vital to go through this experience and to achieve the most of it. And then I believe also that that the master was the one that opened me the doors to the different opportunities that were going to appear after, which, as I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, was Zaha Hadid Architects and Heriot-Watt Studio. I actually spent 5 years in each office, and I believe I actually managed to experience lots of projects, lots of different competitions, commissions, and I felt very lucky to actually have been part of it. So some of the different projects that I was part of during this time, during my time in Zaha, during my time in Heriot-Watt, were different types. I mean, there was not only one trend or one type of field that we should be focusing on. There were like different functions in terms of we could do commercial, we could do hospitality, we could do residential. I mean, whatever was coming, we were taking it. And in this case, for example, there is a residential complex that we did in Singapore for Zaha in 2014, that actually opened in 2014. Of course, different competitions, different commissions. Again, these two are also for Zaha. Also, this residential tower that I did already when I was in Heriot-Watt Studio. As you can see already, the language of the architecture is very much different to what I just showed in the previous slides. And one of the highlights that I believe happened during my time in Heriot-Watt was our collaboration with Google, and this building specifically, the Google, what we call the Google KEX1, which are the headquarters of Google in the UK. It was going to be the headquarters of Europe, but when Brexit happened, everything had to change, unfortunately. And of course, you can see the architecture here is already very much different to the kind of more form-like architecture of before. But the reason I'm going a little bit fast with this project is because I want to focus my attention on two projects, which I believe are actually the most important ones during my career or during my last 10 years. One of them is in Zaha. Well, one of them was during my time in Zaha. The other one also was during my time in Heriot-Watt. So the one starting with the one with Zaha, it was the Morpheus, which is the Morpheus Hotel in Macau, which opened on 2019, if I'm not mistaken. And but of course, before the opening, there were like so many years of design, development, construction. I think maybe there have been maybe around 7 years, just to put an average. And so what is the Morpheus about? I don't know if you guys know the building, but it's kind of a very striking building from the beginning. The first time I saw this image or this photo, actually, I thought it was a render, but no, this is an actual photo. And I think when I talk to people about the Morpheus Hotel, if I gotta be pretty honest, it's a very kind of love and hate relationship between the building or between the shape of the building. But what I always find common between the people that I talk with is actually the strong reaction that it causes in people. So it definitely causes an impact, definitely causes a reaction. But more than the shape of it, what I actually focus more is on the innovation that this building brought with it. So, I mean, if you from whatever angle that you see it, actually, the building actually pushed the structural innovation in a way that it actually managed to adapt to this shape. I mean, before this building, actually, most of us or many of us actually didn't really expect that this could actually be built, and now it's actually there. So and I think the most innovative part of the building is actually, or during this time of the building was, it's a structure. So all these kind of lattice that you see on top of the building, which we call it exoskeleton, is actually the structure of the building. It's actually holding the building, so it's not ornamental. So, and that allowed us to reduce the structure that we had inside. Actually, my dear friend Shamil, maybe in some other opportunity, may be able to talk to you about all this, because actually he also was part of the team, and he was very part of the very concept of these projects, and he was in the facade team. So it was good to have him, of course. And talking about the team, this was actually the team of the Morpheus. As you can see, we're all there. I think actually the team was a little bit larger than this. It's not everyone here, but I think this is the core team. And as you can see, Shamil is on the left side, and I'm also next to him. And so this is the team, and of course, most of the team was focused on the facade, because obviously of the complexity of the project. But the interior team was a very small team. So we were only 3 people. I didn't mention before, sorry. We were assigned actually to do the interiors of the building. So as I mentioned here, we were only 3 people. So it was basically a project architect, a technical architect, and a designer. In my case, I was a designer back then. And how did the interiors end up? They ended up like this. So again, what I'm very happy with is that it ended up very much like the renders that we had back then, or like the concept that we thought of since the beginning. And again, I think similar to the exoskeleton, it also causes a strong reaction. It causes an impact, especially when we are there. Especially if you manage to go there and you see all this in real time, it's actually very, very, very impactful. And that was, I think, one of the drivers since the beginning of the project, to add certain amount of drama to it. So nothing, at least in terms of the agenda for the interiors of this project, nothing could end up being just blank. We had to add certain drama to it, there had to be something happening everywhere, at least in this case. So how do the interiors work? Like, just to put it very briefly. That the slide took a little bit. Okay, so this an image of this a PDF actually of the ground floor of the building. So just to put it very quickly, so the big red lines are actually indicating where the entrance of the hotel was. The small red lines are actually the entrance to the main lobby. So then that big gray square in the middle is actually the main lobby, where then you could go to the reception, which is in this purple areas. And then once you go to the reception, you check in, and then you go up to your rooms through the cores, which are the red blocks. And then there's another connection back then where the green area is, which was connecting to the casino area of the hotel. So this is, in a nutshell, more or less how it worked. And I forgot to mention that there's a separate entrance, which is if you see towards the left side, actually there's that VIP entrance. So each of these spaces, the entrance, the VIP entrance, and the main lobby, and also the other different space in between, became like small projects in themselves, because even though they could carry similar language, the constraints for each of these spaces were quite different. So the agenda for it also was quite different. So, but the main space from all of this was the main lobby. So, and in the beginning, we exactly didn't know how to start with this, how to ignite some sort of design or idea for it. I mean, we have this huge space. This is a section actually of the space. So we have this huge space that was connecting with the casino, was connecting with the main entrance, was going to have a small little areas like the reception area, maybe a cafe just next to it, some storage area. So what would have been the concept? Should we actually do something very similar to what was happening outside, or that would have been a little bit repetitive? So we didn't know exactly how to face it. So the first idea that we actually thought was very simple. We just do some straight walls, and then we can maybe play with the patterns on top of the walls, and that would allow for a certain amount of drama. But when we were looking into the very, very initial renders that we did, that was actually not enough. So then we thought, okay, why don't we do more like a more Saha thing in terms of applying curves. So we started doing the kind of these balconies with different curves. I think we even did a very small physical model of it, but again, it didn't really work very well. We also thought maybe some more drastic measures, like actually bringing the whole roof of the building and taking it down inside. And but as you can imagine, the project was already quite expensive, and doing this was going to try the project to be even over budget. So we thought maybe this was actually not the best direction. But throughout the different iterations and the different ideas that we started discussing between each other, one idea that kept appearing and reappearing was the use of triangulations and the use of facets in the building. We thought, oh, why don't we actually apply this, and why don't we see if that actually the use of some certain triangulation within the building maybe can actually work. And that actually maybe was not the same as what was happening outside with the exoskeleton, but it could be maybe a little bit more relatable with what's happening outside. So we tried that, and this is one of the very early renders that we tried for the building. And as you can see, we were reapplying the idea of the facets, and when we saw this for the first time, we said, okay, actually this has quite a lot of potential, at least from our point of view. So we thought there was quite a potential, and something that we actually liked very much was how it was connecting to the top of the building. So as you can see, the triangulation that was happening inside the lobby actually was somehow merging with the triangulation that was happening outside in the facade. So this kind of connection we thought actually could have been very interesting to explore. So we thought that this was actually a direction that maybe we should take forward. So we decided to explore this. We started to explore the triangulation and the different facets of the surface that we're creating. We did several studies and to see which triangulation was fitting actually best. In this case, for example, we're analyzing each of the different triangles in the sense of which one actually should have more hierarchy on top of the other one, which one should be slimmer, which one should be bigger, and what if actually we even subdivide these triangles even further? What if actually we can actually play with the triangles that are inside the bigger triangles, and we start pulling them or pushing them back? And then, of course, came the idea of the patterns. We started thinking about how to apply patterns to the different triangulation patterns that could actually be windows, can actually be lighting, or can be other sorts of compatible systems that could actually fit even more into the main lobby and enhance the atmosphere. So by applying actually all these systems one next to the other and putting them together, we were started to creating this what we call the lobby walls, and we started feeling actually quite happy with it, in the sense that we thought that it was actually getting somewhere. Of course, we had to think of the structure, but in terms of the structure, we thought that it was quite easy to apply, in the sense that each of the triangles could actually be a self-supporting system that could be attached to the structural system of the whole building. So with all this in mind, and once we started putting all the layers together, all the systems together, we started rendering to see actually how it was looking. And one of the first images that actually had, once we put all these things together, was the one that we're showing you here. Even though the materials are not exactly the ones that as we decided to put in the end, it actually started looking, since very early age, it started looking very much like what it was going to happen before, as you can see here. So you have first the big actually triangles with the smaller subdivisions, and then the patterns on top. We are still trying to decide what the patterns are going to be. Actually, if they're going to be lighting, or there could actually be windows for the people who was at the back. Just to let you know, at the back of these walls, there were restaurants, cafes, and a few VIP suites. This is another snapshot from a separate view. So, and here also we're thinking about how else can we enhance the top? how else can we enhance the connectivity between these lobby walls and what was happening in the upper side of the facade. So this is a sketch. This is actually a 3D sketch that we did. Basically, it's a render section of the building. So you more or less you can see all the different activities that were happening. So as I mentioned before, so here you have the main road towards the right side with the entrance to the building, and here you were going inside the lobby. You were doing in the lobby whatever you need to do. You could stay there, yes, in the different sitting areas that were happening, or you can actually take your lifts to go up. And behind the lobby walls, there were happening some other activities like restaurants, casino areas, pubs, or some other rooms, hotel rooms, sorry. Once we thought that actually the triangulation that we're doing for the lobbies was successful enough, we thought that actually the triangulation could become the main theme for the interior. So it was not only for the lobbies, but maybe we can extend this language to everywhere else inside the building or inside the interior areas. And actually, for example, in this slide that I'm showing here, the triangulation became the easiest way of actually connecting the interiors to the complex facade that was happening outside. So this is one of the final renders that we did when we were already preparing construction documents just before construction started. So as you can see, it's very much like what we had before in terms of, at least in terms of renders. I think the render company played a lot with how the light was going to hit in this, and added also extra drama to it. There's another view actually, and here I like actually this view because you could also see the systems that were going to happen that were actually being designed in parallel to the lobby walls, which are, for example, the flooring system, which was having already certain patterns that need to actually have a dialogue with everything else. Also, we had furnitures. We have the reception area. And one very important thing that I hadn't mentioned before, we had also the lifts. So we had also to do something with the lifts. So starting actually with the floors, the floor, as I mentioned, had different patterns. So we were actually thinking of applying certain patterns to it, but we thought that the patterns actually should, in a way, emulate the circulation that was happening there. So and there were different types of circulation in the sense that people who were entering the lobby, people who were just passing and going to the casino, or people who were actually going to the room. So there were different types of, or different levels of circulation. So in this case, these are some of the studies that we did with it. And the final ones that we chose were actually these ones. And if you look at this image and actually and this one also, we thought that these actual patterns would actually also go out into the entrance and extend to it. So they could actually be calling the people who were outside in the entrance, calling them inside the building. As I mentioned, the lifts. So there's a few different options that we did for the lifts. Actually, I think we did a few more, but in here we have the option of the cabin, the option of the capsule, actually, and the option of the diamond. We actually we decided to take actually the capsule, but given that it was going to be actually very hard to build, we decided to go for the diamond. And the diamond, of course, fitted very well with everything else, given that everything was triangles. So this is one of the images that we did back then. And actually, the lift was just before I left Saha. The lifts. I finished designing the lifts, and then I actually left Saha and moved to Heriot-Watt Studios. So I couldn't see the whole development of the lift, but I was actually happy to see that the lift that eventually was built is very similar to what we had back then in concept. And just to finish with other areas inside the lobby, the furniture that we also were designing, and these are just a few conceptual images of what could happen there, bar sitting area, reception, and the final images. So this is, I think these photos were taken during the opening of the building. And as I mentioned in the beginning, we were happy to see that it was actually following and it actually was looking very much like what we had initially back in concept. So this is looking up into the facade of the building. The other maybe most important area of the interiors next to the lobby was the main entrance. So these are also concept images for the entrance. For the entrance, we decided also to maybe apply a similar thing to what was happening, but we also didn't want to repeat ourselves in terms of just grabbing the triangles that were happening inside the lobby and just putting it outside. So we tried to create some sort of chandeliers that were bringing light into the entrance. And so this is a few drawings that we did back then. We have more or less to explain how the entrance was working. And these are the final images of the entrance. Of course, the entrance have, again, as I was saying, each of these were projects in itself, and the entrance have very different objects that were also happening within this area. Like as you can see here in the bottom in the photo, is that the zebra crossing. So we decided to make the zebra crossing as following the different patterns that were inside in the floor inside of the lobby. And we applied certain other patterns like diamond shape patterns inside the walls that were circulating the entrance. And other small objects like the signings for all the signage, for example. So that actually was also imitating the patterns that we were recreating inside. Last, just to finish with the Macau project, the VIP entrance. So the VIP entrance had to have its drama in itself with the different studies of how actually to optimize the geometry, to optimize the different patterns that actually were morphing from the wall up to the roof. The study of the different materials that we were using, and final image, the final photo of the building. And this actually was my experiences with the interior of the Morpheus building. And right after that, once we submitted the construction documents for this project, that's the time where I actually moved to Heriot-Watt, which was a completely different experience in itself. I mean, Heriot-Watt, the methodology, the type of projects they choose, how do they approach the concepts is very much different to what we did back in Saha. So, and in that sense, it was a little bit shocking to me how they were actually approaching design, because I was taught in one way and these guys were doing it in a completely different way. So this is just a snapshot of how the actual office is. So it's actually a very nice setup office with lots of different objects that are just put every now and then along the space. And you can, as you know, of course, Thomas Heriot-Watt. I mean, he's not an architect; he's a product designer. So he has started with a lot of products, and I guess that because of that, actually, his priorities exactly maybe not. How to put it? Maybe his priorities maybe not the aesthetics of the building, like what we saw before, or maybe the form-finding experience that the building can bring, like what we saw before in Saha. In this case, it was more about the strategy. In this case, it was trying to create something smart, regardless of how the shape was going to look, regardless of how quirky or how silly it could look. It's just to create something smart. And I think these two images actually put it very well, that this kind of table, very simple table that you can actually elongate, or this bench that it looks like you just pull out a pattern out of or a tile out of the floor, or this one that actually very much like, which all these projects were done before I entered the office. So this is a bridge also in London that whenever you need it, you just take it out. When you don't need it, you just roll it back. So with all this kind of, with this approach in mind, this is how we approach the following project that I'm going to talk about, which is called the Landings project, which is another collaboration that we did with Google, and it's this one here. So you can see the language of this project compared to the language of the Morpheus are things that are completely different. And I also that's also another reason why I like to talk about these two projects, because they show very different phases of what architecture can bring, and with the same amount of research behind. So the Landing is actually, just to put it very, very quickly, the Landing is an office building that was done for Google. and it's supposed to happen in California. Actually, we already finished the planning process, and it was about to start construction this year, but unfortunately COVID happened and everything had to be delayed. As I mentioned, the landing is in the city Mountain View in the north of California, and the landings actually work as a sort of entrance to the Google campus. If you don't know, actually most of Mountain View is owned by Google, so they have properties here and there, like everywhere. And as you can see here, this is a very early image of the actual master plan concept that actually Google was thinking for Mountain View. So to have different sort of campuses, like you can see here, the Googleplex, Charleston East, Bayview, all are different offices for Google. And the landings actually was working as a sort of door from the highway to the campus. So that actually was very important in terms of sight and in terms of experience of how the drivers could actually approach or how the drivers could actually enter the Google experience. So similar to Heriot-Watt, similar to Saha, this is not different. We were doing lots of options, thousands of options, maybe even more. So then we decided to approach actually this building a different way. And what I actually like about Heriot-Watt is that the very simple way to approach building, and the very simple and the very easy, and the way we actually frame the concept is usually explained in very simple steps, which is what I'm going to describe right now. So for Google, for this building, actually, we decided to focus on what are the most important principles that we need to keep in order to enhance the Google experience. One is simplicity, structural efficiency. We want to keep as much daylight as possible. It needs to have access to nature, and we need connectivity. Especially for Google, connectivity was the most important part, is to have an open plan where everybody could talk with each other. So with all these principles in mind, we followed these following steps. So we actually grabbed the simple shape, which actually we related to the shape of a warehouse. Why a warehouse? Because we thought that a warehouse was, first, a very simple shape. Second, you can actually recreate any sort of activity within a warehouse. And third, because it's easy to fabricate. So you can even actually just buy a warehouse off the shelf and just put it wherever you want. So that's what we said. Let's start with a warehouse. That's going to be our idea. So we just grabbed a little warehouse and we put it in the middle of the site. We actually rotated the warehouse in order to allow for more daylight as much as possible. We elongated the warehouse to fit the site, and then we just repeated it across the site. And that's how the building was born. Then we readapted some parts of the site in order to fit better the site. We readapted some parts of the building to fit better the site. We also moved a little bit the orientation of the whole building in order to allow for more density. We lifted the central part of the building to allow for a central plaza. We created some courtyards. We decided to use some concept for the landscape. And basically that was it. That was the building. So I guess a conceptual section of the building was something like this. So as you can see, so we have these stepping platforms, which were allowing for the connectivity that we were looking for. We had this central plaza in the beginning, and that was very much it. And all the top part, which was dedicated for office space, was enjoying as much daylight as possible. All the rooms that were down in the lower floors were support areas, technical areas, back of house areas, and also amenities that didn't need that much light. So as I mentioned before, so we with this building and with this shape, we managed to keep the priorities that we had back then, which was daylight, nature, placemaking with the creation of the plaza, and the team connectivity. The most important part of the building for Google actually was the interior, was the workspace. How can we make the space as enjoyable as possible, as connected as possible? So as I mentioned, daylight, access to nature, like the courtyard that you see here on the right side, but also the choice of materials in terms of, in this case, the implementation of wooden materials. And of course, if we want to design office space, we need to see of all the different standards of sizes of meeting rooms, conference rooms. What is the most ideal size of a table in order for us to be working? The height of the table. Do we actually want to be working on tables or not? Especially if it's Google, where we were preferring actually more flexibility and be able to be working from anywhere. So these some of the already sketches that we were thinking of how more or less to identify the different areas within the building. The light blue areas is the office space, so it's usually adjacent to the facade for allow daylight. The dark blue spaces are the more technical areas, back of house areas, so they were more in the middle because they didn't need much light. And a sort of circulation that was going through, was cutting through all these areas. These are the different levels of how to set up the function inside the building, parking at the bottom, amenities, office space, team space, the type of materiality, very different interiors to what we did in Saha. In here, we wanted to keep pretty honest. We used to leave the structure exposed. We didn't need much finishes, just certain, we were just trying to focus the most important finish to just certain areas, and that's it. The rest could just stay exposed. And also we're actually concentrating more our efforts in terms of the circulation that was happening, or what's going to happen inside, in terms of the experience of the user. And I think that was, as I said, similar to the interiors of the building, what Google was prioritizing. It was the user experience, what's going to happen inside the offices, how people were relating with each other. What was in this case, in this slide, for example, what was the journey? For example, if you arrive to the basement by car, what do you see from the moment you park your car up to when you get to your desk? What do you see if you arrive by bus, for example, or if you take a bike? Do you take another entrance? And which core actually takes you up? So all these kind of small experiences is what we were prioritizing here more than anything else. So I think it was, when I look back then, I think we were creating more a strategy than anything else. And this is just a rough sketch of how we wanted to enhance the different activities inside the building and how we wanted to enhance the user experience. So every time you move inside the building, there's one experience that is different to the other one, but there's a relatability in between experiences, and that progresses throughout the building. And just to finish with this project, and one part that is very important especially for the Google projects and many also Heriot-Watt projects, is what we call the sequence of a day in the life. So a day in the life basically refers to how one person, what I mentioned before, how one person is going to move from one point to the other. So in that sense, we create a few snapshots of, in this case, of this building, of the landings building, and we're just going with one person and taking different snapshots of the day of that person. So starting from here, you arrive at your office. What do you see at the beginning? How we can enhance the site in order to enhance your experience when approaching the building? Then you're approaching the lobby because you're about to enter the building. Who do you meet? Who do you talk to? What architectural opportunities are there in order to allow for the space to do these interactions with people? Once you get to your desk, once you go to your office space, how focused you want to be? What are the type of choices of materiality that we need to create in order for you to stay focused and try to be as efficient as possible? When you go for lunch, who are you meeting? Where are you meeting them? And in which space is this? And do you want to stay also in the same space to do some work, or do you want to go somewhere else? And finally, if you have friends, and then you need to send them away, or you actually bring them inside the building, which entrance do you see? Which areas you would like the guests to see the building from? So all these sort of activities is the things that we are actually prioritizing and the things that we are tracking in order to create the experience to shape the building. There's a few less snapshots of the renders that we did. This is the central plaza of the building, and the building from a very small river that was adjacent to it. Just to finish, team of the team of the project. Again, like I said in the beginning, I think the team was essential for the development of this And one of the things that I usually highlight about the Hedwig experience is the atmosphere that happens inside, the people you meet, and the nice experience that I created throughout the people that you meet here. Well, I think that's it from me. Actually, yes, just one thing just to finish, and just that I just remembered, and it was actually about the teams. I remember a friend was telling me that that usually in terms of teams, when you have one team with an idea and another team, when you have one great team with an idea and one not so great team with a better idea, it's actually always better to go with the great team, because given that the team is going to be actually great, they're eventually going to develop the better idea in the end. So I think that's actually my highlight from all this experience, actually teamwork, the people who I met, the people who I managed to work with, and the people who I managed to collaborate. And yeah, once again, thank you, and thank you for listening to all this.
Thank you, Miguel. Thank you, Miguel, for sharing your wonderful experience with us and taking us through those wonderful diagrams. I'm sure that will really help our students getting into interim presentations next week and getting inspired from those diagrams to present their project. So the floor is now open to question and answers. I would encourage the participants here, the attendants here, to use the chat box to share your question. I'd like to start off here with I have plenty of questions lined up for you, Miguel, and I think it's a very ongoing discussion that whenever we meet, we kind of have this. Your shift from Zaha's project and Zaha's office to Hedwig, and also that is also this question is also evident in your presentation. The shift of like looking at your renderings and the realism that you depict in the renderings at Zaha's office versus the renderings, the collage that you see in Thomas Hedwig projects, and talking about experiences. This is a two different take and two different shifts where you kept on referring to the end product looking like exactly like the rendering, versus that emphasis is not there on the Hedwig project. What is your comment on that, and what do you think is appropriate within academia to follow?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a very good question in the sense that, as I mentioned, I mean, first of all, it was a shock to me to move from one place to the other one, because it's a very different perspective. Exactly as you mentioned, in Zaha, we were used to do this kind of maybe more than realistic renders, these very beautiful renders, these very dramatic renders, just to showcase everything that was happening inside. You know? And the render itself actually had to be beautiful. Which didn't really matter in, as you're saying, it didn't really matter in Hedwig, because in Hedwig we see the fact that we were thinking of it more as a strategy. In that sense, it really didn't mind actually to produce renders. In that sense, we were, for example, what I'm showing on my screen right now actually was enough. So, for example, what do we want to do with this? Okay, we want actually to take people from one place to the other one, and by doing that, we want them to pass through this space and through this space and through this space. So by doing that, we could just create certain diagrams and attach to the diagrams a few snapshots of what was happening next to it, similar to what I explained in this day in the life sequence. And in that sense, I mean, of course, it's a little bit difficult to set preferences here. But I think when you are building your story in order to create a design, from my point of view, I think like realistic renders are not really needed. I mean, realistic renders, of course, is a way to approach it, but there's many other different ways to do it. And Hedwig is a very good example of it. And they don't even have to be diagrams, right? As you know, I mean, they can even be hand sketches. They can even be physical models, actually, where you have one transition to the other. And especially if you see it from an academic point of view, actually, that's the experience that I would be expecting for, actually, to work more with different sort of systems in the sense of physical models, diagrams, if possible, renders, in order to tell your story, right? But at least something that I like is, like, in our case, when I look back at my master, it's very nice that I had the opportunity to do the things that I was doing in my master, also in Saha and also in Heriot-Watt. Physical models, sketches, diagrams, this kind of renders, all this research in order to tell your story.
Yeah, right. Thanks for that. We've got a couple of questions coming up. The first one is, what was the greatest challenge during your master's degree, and how likely would you recommend young architects to do masters, as most tend to graduate right after a bachelor's, or they tend to move into practice right after the bachelor degree?
Yeah, that's actually, I've been asked that question quite a few times, and I think it's a hard question, to be honest. I think for maybe some others will be a little bit easier, but I think it's a hard question. First of all, I think first of all, let's start with the highlight. So the highlight of my master, what I mentioned was actually, I would say from my point of view, was the team. So I think because of the team, I managed to, my experience within the master was actually quite enhanced. And by team, I'm saying discussing ideas, talking with people, even having fun with people, because I mean, it's a master of architecture. You're not expecting very short days. It's going to be very late. It's going to be very long days with late nights. So the experience that you get with these people and how this experience fits your projects, at least in my case, was something that I found very fulfilling. So I would say actually teamwork. That's one thing more than anything. And in terms of doing a specialized master of architecture after the school, I think that actually depends, I think, because some people may argue that you actually don't need a master to do architecture. And that is very much about the talent, like many other arts. Why do you need a master in arts? But again, of course, talking from my perspective, if it wasn't for this master, I wouldn't have had the chance to the opportunities that I had afterwards. And by opportunities, I'm not only saying the opportunity to be in Saha, the opportunity to be in Heriot-Watt. I'm saying the opportunity to see the world from a completely different perspective. When I did the architecture association, when I was in the architecture association, first of all, I went to London for the first time. So the people first of all, meeting the city, such a cosmopolitan city, people from all over the world. And inside my master, all these different people coming from Middle East, coming from Asia, North America, even from my same region, and we were talking differently. So I mean, all this mixing of ideas, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have had them if it wouldn't be for the master.
Yeah, I remember those days back at the DRL where working in a team is a project on its own, figuring out your strengths and weaknesses and all that. And students tend to we try to have that experience within the undergraduate program, but when they also move into offices, they tend to have a first-hand experience. Moving into other questions here, which project was really personal to you? And following up on that, Nadia asks, what are the most important takeaways that you took away from working at these two different firms?
Okay, in terms of, I treasure very much my time in, I treasure very much my time during the Morpheus design. I think, again, I have to say it again, I think it was because of the team. And until now, I find it striking how just 3 people, sometimes actually we were only 2 people, managed to come up with all that. And it was, even though, of course, there were some late nights in between. I mean, we didn't really work every weekend or anything like that. I mean, we were working for our time, so it was impressive how efficient we were working with each other, and that's because of the dynamics in between the team, how the team was set up, how this small team was set up, and how we were talking to each other, how we were communicating with each other. I think that was the highlight, and of course, I mean, seeing this. When you see something that you did build, it gives you, at least to me, it gives you a completely different impression in the sense like it's inevitable to feel proud about it. It's inevitable. You see it and it's there, and I think that's also why I treasure this project very much. And sorry, what was the second question?
The second one, like the important takeaways from working in these two firms personally. Maybe you've already answered that in a indirect way.
Yeah, I think in terms of takeaways, I could refer back to your first question. For example, if I think of Heriot-Watt, now that I'm rethinking of it, actually I would think in this way. I think actually it was complementary in the sense that when I think of Heriot-Watt, one of the most important takeaways that I had was the concept and the strategy, how to create a building, not just from a shape point of view, but from a user kind of point of view. That's from Heriot-Watt. And from Zaha, actually the shape and the systems that were allowing for the using experience to exist. So if you put it in this way, actually they are actually compatible, right? So yeah.
But also, if you compare both projects, the Morpheus and the Google headquarters, they have different requirements, user requirements. One is more about people coming in for the experience, and therefore the relevance of Zaha designing that project, versus the other one is more about your daily work life, which is something they're not coming in only in for the experience, or also a comfortable environment, and therefore these two have different requirements and project precedent, I believe. Let's move on to the next question. Somebody asked here, how would you say to go about design to create a strong site integrated project? So it's sort of interested in what are the critical steps you would recommend for a site integrated project?
For a site integrated project, actually, for example, if I focus on landings, on the landings project, we did a whole research on how this, what I mentioned at the beginning of the landings project, which was like the landings was working as a sort of door for the rest of the Google campus, right? So because of that, that led us to do a whole research on how the landings could be adapted in the site. So, so of course, I mean, we were studying the vehicular circulation, pedestrian circulation, the adjacent nature that was happening, like rivers and the planting areas that were happening. So in that sense, we, for the landings specifically, nature and the site actually was a very, very important part of it, especially because it was a priority by Google. And so there's, I don't know, from my point of view, I think there are very specific ways of doing it. But in the landings, what we did, for example, is having the whole ground floor just based on amenities. And these amenities were having direct access into the nature. So either the amenities were coming out into the nature or the nature actually was going in. So and many of the side paths that we were creating were actually also doing that. So the side paths were actually going around the site and they were entering the building. So this, unfortunately, I don't have diagrams for these ones, but we had these big diagrams of the landings actually in plan view and how all the different circulations coming from the side were actually crossing the whole building. So I think that could be an interesting approach of actually doing it.
Yeah. So I think what you're also highlighting is the ground plane, how that ground plane and how you design that ground plane to respond to the site is critical in achieving some of these user experiences that you're referring to. There's a question here about, do you feel there is a disconnect between architecture taught in the university versus the work that we do in practice?
I think yes, I think there is. To be fair, I think I have been fortunate that hasn't happened in my case, because as I show in my in the presentation, that what I was doing back in Peru was related to my master, which I ended up, and what I was doing in my master was very related to the processes that I ended up using in Zaha and Heriot-Watt. So in that sense, it was very much a progressive line. And in that sense, I feel very fortunate, but I don't think that's usually the case. because I mean, and I think there's many reasons behind it, to be honest. First of all, depends also. I think that's a much bigger topic because first of all, it depends of where you're coming from. I mean, which country you're coming from. What is the education that is the architectural education that is imparted in that country? What are different opportunities that you're actually going out to? I mean, going to Zaha Hadid, I totally agree that there is not the opportunity that is just around the corner, right? I mean, most people actually won't be doing that. So most people will actually be going to maybe smaller projects, maybe, I don't know if that's the right word, but maybe more real projects in the sense of, I don't know, housing, office spaces, things like that, where you wouldn't be able to apply these things. So in that sense, and understanding that this is basically the majority of cases, sometimes I do feel that the academic schools, or at least some academic schools, should reflect a little bit more what's happening out there. So because I see, and I actually don't know your experience, Shamir, or the participants here, but what I see is that many of the schools are completely detached to what's happening outside. So even though they're pushing for certain ways of seeing architecture, once the student is out, he cannot basically use these ways for anything because that person hasn't been able to find that opportunity. And to get that opportunity actually comes a long way to get it. So I think there should be a mixture of different kind of sort of perspectives of how to address architecture within academia.
I constantly tell students in my studio and within our programs that the academia is a place where they can experiment, and you may not be able to do that beyond the program or academia itself in practice. And therefore, I mean, as you were saying, that depends on which school you're coming from and where you're leading to. This disconnect may be more obvious than the others. A colleague of mine.
I actually, yes, sorry, Shimei, just to interrupt you there. And just one point, actually, something that actually was I found very interesting in my university back in Peru is that our design workshops, I don't know how it happens in other countries, but our design workshops were split by put it like that, by philosophies. So, for example, there were some of them that were actually more related to self-emergence, which is the master that I did afterwards. But some other ones were related to different other things. Like some other ones were more related to the city. Some other ones were actually more technical, more related to construction details. Some other ones were more related to sustainability. So, and students inside the university had actually the freedom to choose the workshop. And each workshop had a program for each year. Like, for example, let's say you were choosing the sustainability design workshop. So there was a sustainability design workshop for year 1, and then for year 2, for year 3. So in a way, you could even stay your whole architectural career inside one of those ones, or you can actually swap and maybe get a little bit more experience. But at least there was this freedom of choosing between different kind of perspectives of what was going to happen afterwards.
Yeah, that's like the clusters also, the units.
Exactly. Exactly like the units. Yeah,
very interesting. Something that we should also look into. Manupuriam asks, what new technological advances fascinate you? Do you think AI will do most of the plans in the future? It may just be a process to select one of the many options through an AI. You worked with Google, maybe they have given you some insights that they told you, oh, we'll give you some new technology. How about using that for your designing?
Yeah, I actually was just thinking of that right now. Not really, to be honest. By the way, working with Google, having Google as a client, it's great. I mean, the atmosphere in the Google campus, people who work for Google, it's so fun to interact with. They just feel like family, which is a sort of client that I haven't felt like in other projects. But actually, going to your question, it's funny that in Heriot-Watt we were more hands-on in terms of doing physical models, more than actually using a technology itself. So it actually didn't happen with Google. Also, it didn't really happen. What I actually think more in terms of technology, in terms of AI, actually refer more to what we were doing in Zaha. So back then, like 5, 6, 7 years ago. I mean, there was, as you know, Shamil, there was the code department that it was more everything about scripting, a parametric system, not trying to use all this kind of new technologies in order to form the shape of a building or form or whatever was happening inside the building. And I also understand that right now they're actually taking this further, and I think they also separate to the code department. They have an AI department, if I'm not mistaken, who's actually pushing these boundaries even further, right? So you have even virtual reality, you have a department of virtual reality. So every project that you're actually doing has to have certain virtual reality inputs in order to develop it, and that's something that we were not having exactly in Heriot-Watt. In Heriot-Watt, I think by the time I left, we were introducing virtual experiences. So maybe like we're using this software, for example, called Enscape. I don't know if you guys are used it over there. Which basically,
no.
you just put your building in 3D, and you just put the virtual, I don't remember how you call the virtual helmet, and then you just basically go through it and see the space in between. But that's as much as I think, that's as much as we went in there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, thanks for that. We might have to close the session soon. Probably last two questions, a couple of them in here. An attendee says, thank you for the informative presentation. Having designed the HQ for Google, what do you think future office design should focus on?
Sorry, having designed the
headquarters for Google, what do you think future office design should focus on?
I think you mean the future design for offices, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think the future design for offices should actually use the Google as a sort of baseline, because what we were creating for Google was very exciting in terms of the interiors, in terms of how people were connecting themselves. So I think now a lot of people are very related to seeing these images where you have offices with slides and playgrounds in it, and actually there's no tables or cubicles. You just have sofas and large living rooms, and people are just working there. And this actually was started with, or part of it was actually started when we started collaborating with Google, which was more than maybe around 10 years ago, or maybe close to 8 years ago, because the Landing's headquarters, before the Landing's headquarters, actually, Heriot had already been collaborating with Google in some other campuses that we did. I mean, some of them are actually being built right now. I don't know if you may be aware of those ones. I think it's called the Dome, which is this huge headquarters. And actually, that one, the Dome, worked as a blueprint for every other Google project. And other projects, like similar to Facebook, similar to I think LinkedIn, if I'm not mistaken. Apple was a completely different thing, by the way. But in terms of Google, I mean, it works as a blueprint in terms of the connectivity, the flexibility, very much to the principles that I mentioned in the beginning, like enhancing simplicity, enhancing nature, honesty, connectivity again. So all these kind of things. So I mean, for example, something that I remember was very shocking to us back in the beginning. Like Google just didn't want any gimmicks. They didn't want to show the structure or the pipes. Just leave it all exposed. I said, okay, great. Let's leave it all exposed. And let's be honest about the whole space. And let's see how can we do it to make it nice, to make it beautiful, to give a great user experience. So yeah, I think in that sense, will work pretty well, and the space that we create actually also work pretty well.
Great. So that last question that we'll take, unfortunately, we cannot take more questions. So the question here says, having worked at a big name firm such as Heriot-Watt, do you feel larger scale projects are more rewarding than small scale projects?
No, definitely not. Not from my point of view.
Maybe as a follow-up and there's a second question that could be followed up with that, is like, what are you currently working on now? Have you been working on projects tackling post-COVID design?
Yeah, well, actually, I'm working very small projects. But first of all, yes. First with the first question, actually, Definitely no. Well, at least that's my perspective. I don't know if some other people actually feel better because of they're doing like bigger stuff. Certainly, bigger stuff may lead you to collaborate with more people. So if you see that as a benefit, or let's put it like this, that could be a benefit maybe because you interact with more people and maybe you can learn. If you see this as a learning experience, then maybe in that way could be a little bit more helpful maybe. But apart from that, not really. I think the beauty of small projects, or the first thing that comes to my mind when I think about small projects is the amount of detail that we managed to go through. In Heriot-Watt or even in Saha, we couldn't really go into that level of detail. And in the end, we always had to give our projects to someone else to develop it because in Saha and Heriot-Watt, most of these kind of firms are more like concept firms. We don't usually take the building until the end. So we always need consultants to help us developing this and eventually build it, right? Which usually doesn't happen in interiors. In smaller scale buildings. For example, if I'm doing a small house, I'm pretty sure that I will. If I'm involved in it, I'm pretty sure that I'm going to be there from beginning to end. So I can see the whole experience. And for example, my wife actually that works in housing, and and it's completely different to what I'm doing. It's completely different. So for example, when I'm here in some of her meetings, I'm like, oh, what is she doing? What is this? And likewise the other way around, right? She also, she sometimes doesn't understand why I'm doing the things that I'm doing. And to the second question, so right now I'm actually working in smaller projects. So I'm actually starting working with my wife. I'm started doing my own stuff, which I think is usually the aim of every architect. However, I'm trying to, if yes, I can touch base a little bit on what I'm exactly doing at the moment. I'm also trying to maybe focus more on the operational side of the business and the management side of the business. My last role was actually project manager. So right now I'm doing parallel to be working with my wife in these smaller scale buildings. I'm also doing a master in business to try to feed every side of the business and to enhance it even further.
Yeah. I think that's also important, right? To keep the shop running,
Yeah,
part
exactly.
of the architecture profession. So, yeah, Miguel, thank you very much for taking time and sharing your experiences and your insights into architecture. Really appreciate the time that you've spent with us and answering the questions in here. I'm sure we'll be having you over for some of our design juries in the near future, and I hope you could find time to listen to some of our students. I'm sure they're inspired from your work today and will use some of that in their own project design and presentation. All right, thank you very much, Miguel. Over to you, Alida.